about the Diddy trial.
Diddy's former longtime employee Capricorn Clark testified that after the mogul found out that Cassie was dating Kid Cudi, he showed up at her house with a gun and said, "Get dressed, we're going to kill this." He kidnapped Clark at gunpoint and forced her to be a party to breaking into Cudi's house.
Picture this. It's 5 a.m. on a cold December morning in Los Angeles. Capricorn Clark is startled awake by violent pounding on her apartment door. She peers through the peephole and her blood runs cold. It's her boss, Sean Combs, standing there with rage in his eyes and a gun in his hand. What happens next would haunt her for over a decade, and now, in a federal courtroom, she's finally breaking her silence through tears that won't stop falling. But wait, before we dive into this terrifying night, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a boss who made you uncomfortable? Maybe they crossed boundaries or made you feel unsafe. Well, imagine that boss being one of the most powerful men in the music industry with unlimited resources and a reputation for getting what he wants at any cost. Can you imagine the fear? Now, let's rewind to understand how Capricorn ended up in this nightmare. Capricorn wasn't just any employee. She was Sean Combs' trusted personal assistant who climbed her way up to head his Sean John fashion empire. Picture a young woman, ambitious and hardworking, who thought she'd hit the jackpot when she got hired by one of hip-hop's biggest moguls in 2004. She was living the dream, right? Access to the glamorous world of celebrity parties, fashion shows, and million-dollar deals. But here's what most people don't understand about working for someone with that level of power. You become more than an employee. You become a keeper of secrets, a witness to private moments, and sometimes, unfortunately, a target when things go wrong. For 14 years, Capricorn navigated this dangerous world, thinking her loyalty would protect her. She thought loyalty meant everything, but she was about to learn that in Combs' world, knowledge could be a death sentence. Think about it. What would you do if you discovered your boss's girlfriend was secretly dating someone else? Would you tell him? Would you stay quiet? This is exactly the impossible position Capricorn found herself in during late 2011. The night before that December morning, Capricorn carried a secret that felt like a ticking bomb in her chest. She knew that Cassie Ventura, Combs' on and off girlfriend, the beautiful singer and model who was often seen on his arm at red carpet events, had started seeing rapper Kid Cudi. Now, if you know anything about Sean Combs' reputation, you'd understand why this information was so dangerous. Let me paint the picture for you. Sean Combs wasn't just any boyfriend. He was a man who allegedly controlled every aspect of Cassie's life. Their relationship was described as tumultuous and violent, with Combs reportedly monitoring her every move, controlling who she could see, where she could go, and what she could do. So when Cassie finally found the courage to see someone else, even secretly, it was an act of rebellion that could have deadly consequences. But here's where it gets complicated. Capricorn had made a choice. She wouldn't be the messenger who delivered news that would send her volatile boss into what she knew could be a murderous rage. Have you ever been in a position where you had to choose between loyalty and truth, where either choice could destroy someone? That's exactly where Capricorn found herself. She thought her silence would protect everyone. Cassie, Kid Cudi, and maybe even Combs himself from doing something he couldn't take back. She was wrong. Now, how do you think Combs found out about the relationship? In today's world of social media, private investigators, and street informants, secrets don't stay buried for long, especially when you have the resources to uncover them. When Combs discovered the relationship, the news hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. But this wasn't just about heartbreak. This was about betrayal, about losing control over someone he considered his property. And here's what made it even worse for Capricorn. Combs didn't just discover that Cassie was seeing Kid Cudi. He also learned that his trusted assistant, the woman he'd elevated from personal assistant to head of marketing, had known about it all along and hadn't told him. In his mind, she had chosen Cassie's side over his. She had betrayed him. Can you imagine the terror Capricorn must have felt when she realized Combs knew she'd been keeping this secret? Picture lying in bed, maybe finally getting some peaceful sleep after weeks of carrying this burden, when suddenly your world explodes with violent pounding on your door. When Combs discovered the relationship, he didn't just want answers, he wanted blood. And Capricorn, the woman who had dedicated over a decade of her life to his empire, suddenly became both his accomplice and his victim. So there she was, peering through that peephole at 5 a.m., seeing her boss's face twisted with rage. What would you do in that moment? Would you pretend you weren't home? Would you call the police? Remember, this is Sean Combs, a man with connections everywhere, unlimited resources, and as we're learning through this trial, an alleged history of making people who crossed him disappear from his life in various ways.
And there were guys with cameras everywhere. Janice sat in a corner for 20 minutes and then left without saying goodbye. After that, Janice's appearances alongside Diddy became rare. There were whispers that
Capricorn opened that door. She had to. When someone like Sean Combs shows up at your door with a gun, you don't have the luxury of choice. But what happened next would scar her for life. We're going to go kill him." Those 6 words changed everything as Combs forced Capricorn into his car at gunpoint, speeding through the empty streets of Los Angeles toward the Hollywood Hills where Kid Cudi lived. Can you imagine sitting in that passenger seat, your heart hammering against your ribs so hard you think it might burst, watching the man you'd worked for, the man you thought you knew, transform into someone completely unrecognizable? Picture the scene. It's still dark outside, the city barely waking up, and here's this powerful music mogul driving like a madman with his former assistant as his unwilling passenger, heading to potentially commit murder. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision either. Combs had brought one of his security employees with him. This was planned. This was calculated. This was the moment when Capricorn realized that all those years of thinking she was part of his inner circle, she was really just another pawn in his game. But here's what makes this even more chilling. This wasn't just about Cassie anymore. This was about power, control, and what happens when someone dares to keep secrets from a man who believes he owns everyone around him. In Combs' twisted logic, Kid Cudi had committed the ultimate sin. He had taken something that belonged to him, and Capricorn, she had enabled it by staying silent. As they pulled up to Kid Cudi's house in the Hollywood Hills, you know, one of those beautiful modern homes that overlooks the city, Capricorn realized she wasn't just witnessing a crime. She was being forced to participate in what could become a murder. Think about that for a moment. She went from sleeping peacefully in her bed to being an accessory to a potential homicide in the span of less than an hour. In that car, in that moment, she faced an impossible choice: become complicit in violence or risk her own life by refusing to cooperate with a man who had already proven he'd kill for betrayal. What would you choose? Your life or someone else's? But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, and this is where we see just how close we came to this being a murder case instead of a kidnapping case. Kid Cudi wasn't home that morning. Can you imagine the relief Capricorn must have felt, but also the terror, because she knew this meant Combs' rage would only intensify. A man like that doesn't just give up. If he can't get to his target, he finds another way to make someone pay. According to Capricorn's testimony, she was forced to wait in the car while Combs and his security employee went inside the house. Picture her sitting there, hands probably shaking, wondering if they would come back covered in blood, wondering if she would be next if things went wrong. How long do you think those minutes felt like? Probably like hours. When they returned empty-handed, the ride back was probably even more terrifying than the ride there, because now Combs had to live with the fact that his intended victim had escaped, and someone had to pay for that frustration. Thankfully, Kid Cudi wasn't home that morning, and what could have been a murder became just a kidnapping and terroristic threat. But for Capricorn, the damage was done. The woman who had been forced into that car was not the same woman who climbed out of it. She had seen the monster behind the mogul, and she knew her life would never be the same. But here's the part that will really shock you. Capricorn didn't quit. She didn't run. She didn't report what happened to the police. She spent the next 7 years continuing to work for Sean Combs. 7 more years. Can you imagine? 7 years of waking up every day and going to work for the man who had kidnapped you at gunpoint and forced you to participate in what could have been a murder. Why would someone do that? It's easy to judge from the outside, but think about the psychology of what Capricorn was dealing with. She had been terrorized by one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. She knew what he was capable of. She knew he had resources, connections, and as we're learning through this trial, an alleged network of people who would do whatever he asked, leaving might have been more dangerous than staying. For 7 years, Capricorn carried the weight of that December morning, knowing that her silence had nearly cost a man his life and that her boss saw her as nothing more than a disposable tool in his violent games. Every day she went to work knowing she was working for someone who had threatened to kill another human being in front of her. Every day she had to smile, take meetings, manage his fashion empire, all while carrying this terrible secret. Can you imagine the psychological toll, the sleepless nights, the constant fear that if she ever crossed him again, she might not be so lucky? This is what trauma looks like in the corporate world when your boss has unlimited power and no moral boundaries. But the story doesn't end there, because what Capricorn didn't know was that this December morning was just one piece of a much larger pattern of alleged criminal behavior. The kidnapping, as terrifying as it was for her, was building evidence for what would eventually become a federal racketeering case against Sean Combs. Think about it. If he was willing to kidnap his own employee and threaten to commit murder over a relationship, what else was he willing to do? What other lines was he willing to cross? What other people had he threatened, intimidated, or worse? Now, over a decade later, Capricorn sits in a federal courtroom, tears streaming down her face as she finally tells her truth. But let me ask you this. What do you think it took for her to finally find the courage to speak up? After 13 years of silence, after 13 years of carrying this burden, what finally made her decide that enough was enough? Her testimony isn't just about one morning of terror. It's about a pattern of intimidation, control, and abuse of power that allegedly defined Sean Combs' empire for decades. Through her sobs, she's not just recounting events, she's reclaiming her voice and exposing the cost of staying silent in the face of evil. But here's what I want you to think about. Capricorn's story is not unique. She represents countless employees, assistants, and associates who have been trapped in toxic relationships with powerful people who believe their wealth and influence put them above the law. How many other Capricorns are out there still carrying their secrets, still too afraid to speak up? Her courage to finally testify is breaking a cycle of silence that has protected powerful predators for far too long. But it's also raising important questions about power dynamics in the workplace, about what happens when someone has too much control over other people's lives, and about the cost of staying silent when you witness criminal behavior. What would you have done in Capricorn's position? Would you have found the courage to speak up sooner? Would you have stayed silent to protect yourself? Would you have been able to continue working for someone who had terrorized you? These aren't easy questions, and there are no easy answers. Capricorn's courage to speak up after 13 years of silence reminds us that behind every powerful figure's empire, there are real people whose lives hang in the balance. Her story isn't over. This trial continues, and more survivors may find their voices because she found hers. This case is still unfolding, and there are likely more shocking revelations to come. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges, including racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to commit prostitution. But Capricorn's testimony provides a chilling glimpse into the alleged culture of fear and intimidation that surrounded one of hip-hop's most powerful figures. If this story moved you, share it to honor not just Capricorn, but every person who's ever been trapped by someone else's power and finally found the strength to break free. Subscribe to follow this case as it unfolds, because justice delayed isn't justice denied when courage finally speaks truth to power. What do you think will happen next in this trial? Do you believe Capricorn's testimony will be enough to convince the jury? And what does this case say about the culture of silence that has protected powerful predators for far too long? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.